Welcome to the Climate TV channels and the Plurals special pre-Baku show series. We are trying to track here what is going to happen in COP29, take to be the finance COP. And I have with me today Dr. Sunita Narin, Director General of Center for Science and Environment, one of the frontline, I would say, climate expert, an activist from not only India, but entire South Asia and also in the global level. Sunita is now working a lot in Africa, I know. So it's an extremely important kind of part of the whole process. And Sunita, welcome to the show. Thanks for your time. I know it's a busy time.
Jayanta.
Now, this COP29, has been picked to be a finance COP. And a lot of figures are floating around. And CSE has also come up with a wonderful report of where is the money, that kind of report. We'll be discussing that shortly. But before that, something has been happening in global perspective, which is going to influence this whole climate discourse a lot, the US election.
Yeah.
And whatever the results we are having now, it is almost clear that Donald Trump is coming back in the hot seat of US. Now, we have all seen what happened when Donald Trump last time became the president. Let us start from this point. How do you expect Donald Trump 2.0 to engage with the process of global climate change?
So I think, Jayanta, there is no doubt it's going to be devastating, disastrous. Donald Trump is one of the world's last remaining climate skeptics. Donald Trump has made it clear that his country should do more fracking, more drilling. His motto has been drill, baby, drill. He really does not believe that climate change is real, okay? Now, this is particularly bad from the perspective of the United States leadership. And I'm being very deliberate about this because please understand the difference between the past US leadership and Biden was that Biden actually put the US out there to say, no, we are responsible and we will make reductions domestically, okay? It's the only time the US has actually had a domestic reduction target which is meaningful. Okay, 50% reduction by 2030.
Right.
Biden also came up with a very, very good domestic legislation called IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which by all accounts has helped to move investment towards green technologies and move investments towards manufacturing and making the transition towards a cleaner economy. So Biden definitely had played a big role in putting the US out there to say, we are not shying away from our responsibility. Now, that was an important signal, Jayanta, because it helped the whole world to not hide behind the US, okay? Which it's been doing forever. To say, oh, but the US won't take action, so we can't. You know, now the US had to act. So every country had to take up more aggressive reduction targets. I think that leadership, that loss of leadership will have a huge impact on the rest of the developed world. And that worries me because we know there's already a green lash in Europe. We know that other countries of the developed world find that the costs of transition are too high. They do not want to move at the speed and scale. And now with the US coming out so clearly under, we don't know what he'll do because the only possible good part is that the IRA's best benefit is in Republican states. So there is a potential that he may not. But to answer your question, Biden was never very good on international negotiations, the US America. You watched it.
That's the point I was
whether
coming.
it was loss and damage, whether it was climate finance. So when Baku is the climate finance, it isn't as if Trump being elected as against Biden is going to make major difference, okay? Because we were not expecting much from the United States in any case. And I think they need to be pulled and carried, crying and screaming to the make those financial concessions. Now, of course, there will be even less reason for the Trump. You remember Trump's position has always been, I don't need to act, India and China need to act.
Right.
I don't need to act, that they are the ones who are really putting the tariffs. So I think it's going to be a tough time for climate.
Sunita, I think very important point you raised, that the more your kind of thought about that, more the domestic action of US will be impacted rather than the international.
And so the
kind of
leadership of the US, no, and also because domestic action will be impacted, the US leadership on taking
Exactly.
action on climate will be impacted. So it's both, huh?
Now, I'll come to that part, that whether Trump 2.0 may actually be better than 1.0, considering the number of high intensity extreme weather impacts that the US has faced over the last few years when Trump was out of the power. But before that, I really would like to know from you something very critical, I feel, for the negotiation, global negotiation. As you remember, when the last time Trump became the president in the Marrakesh, it was almost overlapping with the Marrakesh Climate Summit, and we all saw that how the not only the US, the entire developed country leadership seemed clueless how to react to that. You feel now this time around the world is better prepared, world beyond US is better prepared to kind of combat the situation and perhaps to engage with US. Do you feel they are better prepared, or it's like last time?
It's difficult to say, Jayanta, because I think the world has changed a lot since Marrakesh, okay? The world is more polarized, the world is more divided, the world is more fearful. Europe is going towards the right wing. In any case, we are seeing more immigration and the war being on the top agenda of countries. We see more and more the war in Gaza leading to more hatred. So the world is a very, very different place right now, and it's difficult to know whether the countries will engage with him on climate change or they would like to make a deal with him on trade, on finance, and on the war. And it's going to be very, it's a different world. And I don't think we can think, I don't think for any global leader, whatever they say, for any Western global leader, climate is today the top agenda. I think they may say it, but I think their most important agenda is trade, economy, immigration.
Another related issue is that do you expect Donald Trump to withdraw from the UNFCCC process as he did the last time? Do you feel that he will be equally kind of countering the climate change global negotiation? So what's your, I know it's early days, just the election result has not been formally announced, it's early days, but still your expectation that what the worst can happen? I'm just trying to understand what the worst can happen for the world.
No, you don't
Do you
know.
have an idea?
Nobody knows what, no, I think, Jayanta, nobody knows what Trump will do. I mean, he does have Kennedy with him as a candidate, as a thing. We don't know. I mean, it is very clear that the US is also going through the worst impacts of climate change. They've just gone through this devastating last hurricane. Of course, there it was, there's a way to twist it to say that it's not climate change, but these will only get worse. And as they get worse, will he be forced to act? There is also the China question, that China is the big question today, regardless of what happens, because China is the one which is controlling all the technologies and all the critical minerals. Now, there is one way to look at it, that Donald Trump will come and, as he promised, put even higher tariff on Chinese vehicles. As another way of looking at it is to say, no, Donald Trump is a pragmatic a businessman, and he will go and make a deal with China. Okay? We don't know. We don't know.
Really don't know. We really don't know.
We don't know.
But something we really know is that Baku has to deliver. If the world has to sustain, the Baku has to deliver.
I
Now,
agree.
Sunita, a lot of data, a lot of figures are being floating around. What should be the kind of financial outcome of the Baku? India has come with 1 trillion. 1 trillion is a figure being kind of talked around. I think the UN has come with 750 billion, and likewise. And the civil society is talking about 3 billion. So how you feel? What is the realistic kind of position or financial target that Baku can really drive at, considering now this US election result?
So I think it's again very difficult. It's too close to call right now. But it one thing is very clear, Janto. I don't know what the outcome will be. Let me tell you what my expectations are.
Exactly.
Okay, my expectations are that whatever the leadership change in the United States, the fact is the world has to be resolute in standing up to the fact that climate change is real, it is impacting the poorest of the world, and that the financial deal is critical to make the transformation in our world. Okay? So it's a question of us now being strong. And we need to make sure that I mean, it's more the onus is now on the leaders of Africa, of the developing world, of India, to make sure that this message of the urgency of action and the need for financial resources at scale to make the transformation in our world is not lost. So I believe Baku can succeed, but now the onus is on us.
Onus is on there. And also, Sunita, is about the quality of finance. Along with the quantity of finance, also there has been discussion about the quality of finance. And CSE has come up with a very detailed report about the money and where the money will come and the quality of finance. So your take on that? Since we are now having, we have seen the last time how the adaptation finance has been impacted. They didn't get even the half of the money they want. And the loss and damage finance has been talked about. So quality of finance, this kind of double accounting, all these are being repeatedly being talked about. So how you see, what's your expectation about the quality of finance coming out from Baku?
So I think, Jayanta, what's very important is both the quantity and the quality must be discussed. And it should also be discussed and completely rejected this whole idea that the contributor base has to be expanded right now. Though I believe that we need a discussion on it. Okay. So I think the quantity needs to be discussed and put on the table. I'm not even going to go into the numbers because, frankly, anything above $1 trillion, I can't count. So I don't know what it means, but it needs to be in the trillions, okay? Because the impact on developing countries, the need for developing countries is very high. Two, it is very clear that we don't need to talk only about the amount, but also the quality of finance. How will it come? Will it come as concessional grants? Will it come as low interest? How will it come? Because in today's world, the money that is coming in the name of climate finance is really coming in a way that is adding to the debt burden of countries, is adding to the stress and the vulnerability of countries, okay? So that clearly needs to be discussed. And lastly, of course, is the big question about who will pay. And that's
Absolutely.
where there is a stalemate on it, where the developed world is trying to now say, but you know, why only us? Why not the other big polluters? It's a legitimate question, but they are the ones who undermined a rule-based system for climate change. They are the ones who made sure that there is no rule on climate change internationally. And it was not done for Trump, it was done for Obama. So let's be clear about this, okay? So today we are in a situation where everything has to be negotiated, and there are no rules on the basis of which you will negotiate all this. And that is really the big crisis. And that's what has to be discussed at Baku. And our expectation is that the world is going to step up. And the world is going to understand that if they polluted in the past, the rest of the world will pollute in the future. And it is in everybody's interest to walk the talk together.
You just said that from where the money will come. That's a big question. Do you expect, again, I say only expect because we really don't know how it unfurls during the COP negotiation. Do you expect the developed countries to put pressure on India and China and these developing economies also come up with fund? Because that's something we have seen before. So you expect realistically they will put pressure on the countries like India and China for coming up with the fund as well?
Yes, I expect that, and that's already happening. And that is one of the reasons why the fund gets delayed, because the question of who will contribute to it. And there is, it happened in the case of loss and damage, will happen again, is happening again, and will continue to happen. That is why a country like India needs to argue for a rule-based system under which, on the basis of certain amount of economic growth, certain amount of emissions, we will also transit from a donee to a donor. But it cannot be done on an arbitrary basis as is being done today.
I'm very clear about that. But let us move a bit away from the finance, though finance is always being the core of the discussion. But often we have seen in previous COPs, Sunita, that these developed countries have come up with something bizarre from somewhere and almost derail the main discussion. For example, if I may put out that, like in Glasgow, they came up with net zero sometime somewhere nowhere the net zero came up. So in the whole discussion, the developing countries are being sucked into it in a way they are being underprepared. Do we expect something of that line happens when this finance talks start? They will try some trick up their step, or that finance will remain the core issue.
It happens in the world every time. Why blame them? It happens all the time. We get sucked into it. You get sucked into it. Every journalist gets sucked into it. Hydrogen became the issue 2 COPs ago. Okay. Net zero was the issue 3 COPs ago. Okay. So I think fossil fuel and coal was the issue last COP. So it's a convenient thing. It's an easy thing. You throw out what is it called? One of those scarecrows or those things which everyone just hits on. And by the next COP, that idea is gone. Nobody. But this COP, I think the biggest issue that is going to be there, and which you must watch out for, is Article 6. There is very clear indication that Article 6 rules will be formulated. Article 6 is about trading of carbon credits, and the Western world needs it desperately, because without
a new carbon market,
a
new carbon market.
Yeah, without a trading regime, they will not be able to meet their emission reduction targets. So now the question is whether our part of the world is willing to sell ourselves cheap, dirty, or whether we are willing to stand up to argue that the rules of the game must be made in a way that voluntary market, which has very, very low levels of integrity, is not allowed, that a regulated market is based on the price of carbon, and that communities which hold the land, hold the forests, which are the biggest sinks of forest carbon dioxide today, have a big role to play. So I think that is the big negotiation, which, at least from what I hear from my colleagues, is likely to be decided in Baku.
How do you see India position?
I have no idea. I have no
just
idea.
Your expectation
I have no idea. I have no idea. I have no idea about the Indian government position.
How India goes about it.
That the Indian government has been on the right side of the fence. It has very clearly made it clear that it is not denying the need to act. But it is also it is with the developing world asking for accountability of the developed world, and asking for it clearly and very, over the years. So I have no doubt that the Indian government will go there and make sure that that position is held. But what else it will do, I don't know, Jayanto. I'm not in the center of government.
Completely agreed on that. No, loss and damage. Loss and damage, Sunita, has come up bit of an unexpectedly the COP before. I think in Sharm el-Sheikh, from almost a no agenda to agenda and almost a defining agenda at the end of COP. And then the last COP in Dubai COP, the first day itself, the loss and damage finance facility was formalized. So how do you see that this loss and damage discussion and deliberation kind of pans in this coming COP? Because this is something very critical for the India, the population, the vulnerable population in West Bengal, Sundarbans, or Bihar or Assam. It's very critical for us. So how do you see, also the Bangladesh is being extremely vulnerable. So how do you see this loss and damage discussion goes forward in the Baku COP? Your expectation?
My expectation is that it must not lose steam. Okay? My expectation is that we must stay strong on it. The impacts of climate change have only increased since Sharm el-Sheikh. The poor are most vulnerable to climate change. They are the victims of climate change. They are not the contributors to the stock of greenhouse gases, but they are the victims of climate change. Their losses must be paid. Damages must be paid. And however weak the agreement is, it is an agreement, a global agreement on loss and damage. And that must be taken forward to its logical end so that a fund, not only is a fund set up, the rules are one in which the most vulnerable communities are compensated for the losses that they suffer because of climate change.
When you say compensated, there's also two counter talks at the global level about the country like India asking for loss and damage support. There's one theory is that India, this loss and damage support should be limited to least developed countries, and the country like India shouldn't ask for it. Another theory is India happens to be one of the most vulnerable countries with a population of 1.4 billion and such a huge population being impacted on loss and damage. They should also ask for the loss and damage support. So how you see that? How should India position itself vis-a-vis loss and damage support?
I don't know what India will do. My position is very clear that India has the complete right to the loss and damage fund. Bangladesh is not the only, there's no way to be able to, it's the worst politics of the world where you're pitting the poor against the poor. Okay? Bangladesh has a coastline, but India's coastline is much bigger. Okay? So we have many more vulnerable people. And it would be terrible to say Bangladesh is vulnerable, India is not vulnerable. Vulnerability does not know boundaries like this. Now, it is very clear that India's economy is good. We have the ability, but it is also clear that the impacts of climate change are happening to the poorest in our world. And they're happening not because of our cause, but because of the stock of greenhouse gases which have come from the Western world. So the loss and damage fund has been created regardless of your economy today. It has been created as compensation that is being paid for the losses that you are suffering or your people are suffering because of the cause of climate change, which is outside your boundary. So I think there is no question about it. And I just think that's another way. I mean, the British did it to us to make us fight each other. And I think that's a classic ploy in the Western, in every world, in every diplomat's toolkit to make people, fight each other and make the poor fight each other. So I think that's always been there. We saw it. We've seen it through the climate negotiations. I think these are too important. These are absolutely existential issues. We need to stand together and we shouldn't let the world divide us.
In fact, as you say, I remember the last German Watch report showed that over the last 2 decades, India happens to be the country which is one of the most affected, both from mortality as well as financial loss. So what you just said, that explains and that I think vindicates that India should be equally, they have the right to ask for the loss and damage support for this vulnerable population. My last question, Sunita, is often we see this COP conclusions are not really continuous. In one COP, you decide something, in the next COP, often you tend to kind of shift to somewhere else. If you remember that in Sharm el-Sheikh, perhaps, there was a huge talk about financial restructuring, banks, and everything. The Dubai COP, we haven't seen. Now, in the Dubai COP, we took various historical decisions, including by 2050, all fossil fuels have to go. But there is no time limit, no interim targets. Do you see the Dubai conclusions will be taken further forward with more definitive timelines and other kind of restriction? Do you expect it to happen here?
It's difficult to say, but it is very clear that that will depend on governments. It's not in your hands or my hands. It's going to be in the hands of governments. As I have written earlier, the COPs have turned into circuses. They've turned into side events, and everyone goes there to network in side events. We need to make sure we keep the focus on the commitments that are made in COP and make sure that we hold the feet of governments to fire when it comes to making sure the commitments are followed through on. That's our job. But our job cannot be to decide what will happen to the commitments. That's governments. They will decide whether they will follow on the governments. It's for us to make sure that we keep the focus on it, but we don't. And that is the tragedy of COPs, that governments can get away with this because all media and all civil society is focused on the side games that are happening and not on the center of the action that needs to be taken. And I think that's where I hope Baku, which is less, which may not be as big as Dubai, may help the world to actually move towards a solution because it may not become a circus there.
As you say this, I just kind of thought about this last point that what Salimul Haq Saab said about more than a year back before we kind of very tragically lost him, that people will lose in the multilateral climate negotiation and the COP process if the COPs do not deliver anymore. And if Baku doesn't come up with what are the minimum expectations of the civil society and the least developed and developing countries, do you feel this multilateral process on climate negotiation will really, really suffer a big hit?
It's already suffering, Jayanto. I don't think there's any question about it. I think Baku is important. Let's keep our sights on Baku and let's see what comes out of it. Okay?
Absolutely. We keep our finger crossed and hope for the best and fear for the worst. So with that, I conclude here. Thanks, Sunita, for your time, and we'll continue to engage on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayanto. Bye.